Leah is the principal of the School of Languages in South Australia. She began her professional career as a teacher of Italian at secondary level. She has been principal of the School of Languages since 2000. And the School of Languages is a unique government school which provides access, choice, and continuity in language learning to students from all three sectors of education. The school currently teaches 24 languages to over 2,100 students. Leah has a long history in involvement and leadership in curriculum development, professional development, and policy development at both state and national level across Australia, including writing the national curriculum for Italian, national statement and profile for languages, state languages policy, national review of languages education, national statement and plan for languages education, South Australian Education Department languages strategy. She has also served as Executive Officer of the National Ministerial Council of Education Working Party for Languages and as a President of the Australian Federation of Modern Languages Teachers Association, through which she led and contributed to significant national projects. She has received 2 major national awards, the Australian Federation of Modern Languages Teachers Association Medal for Outstanding Contributions at National Level to Languages Education, and the Australian College of Education Leadership Award for Outstanding Educational Leadership. Recently, she was also a finalist in the South Australian 2021 Governors Multicultural Awards. Thank you very much, Leah. We are looking forward to your presentation as you have so much background in the development of curriculums and educational projects. So we'll be very happy to see your presentation tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. And to everyone, as previously, if you could mute your microphones during the presentation, that would be really appreciated. And if you would have any questions to Leah, please use the chat. If you experience any technical problems, you could also let me know through the chat or let Renata know through the chat as well. Thank you very much and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. I wish to congratulate the organisers of the conference and wish to congratulate the network for taking this initiative to establish such a powerful group of like-minded people to come together on the very important topic of languages education and languages education for heritage background speakers. I really enjoyed the previous presentation by Anthony Thorpe. I came in for the last 10 minutes or so, and he made some really valuable points. I really enjoyed it. I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but I will be able to listen to the recording. I understand that I do have a PowerPoint, which I think is going to appear at some stage. But I'd like to start off by acknowledging country. In Australia, when we attend conferences, there's always an acknowledgement of country at the beginning. And I would like to acknowledge that I am here in South Australia, in Adelaide, and this is Kaurna land, the land of the Kaurna people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. No doubt, around the world, all the participants that are taking part in this, you also have your traditional custodians as well, who I would also like to acknowledge. Thank you for outlining the role of the School of Languages. If you can move to the next slide, please. As has been said, we are a specialist provider. We belong to the Department of Education, so we are part of the mainstream. We are fully funded as a government school, and while we are a government school, we actually accept enrolments from all 3 sectors of education. That is part of the government's commitment. And we have been we were established in 1986, so we've been around for 35 years. Next slide, please. Our role is to enhance access, choice and continuity. Those are the three key words, so that students who wish to learn a language that is not available at their school come to us. So essentially, students go to school during the day. They may or may not learn whichever language is being taught in their school. And if they wish to learn a different language, they come to us after school. So all of our provision is after school, but it is recognised by mainstream schools, and it is recognised by the senior secondary certification. Next slide, please. When we started, we were very small. Back in 1986, there were only 6 languages offered and 155 enrolments in one teaching centre. And the policy context at the time, in the 1970s, there was a build-up across Australia of an understanding that we live in a multicultural country, and a country that was becoming increasingly linguistically and culturally diverse. And there were various lobby groups and papers being written around the need for languages education, particularly languages education for students of non-English speaking background, for recent arrivals. And this lobbying started to increase in the early 1980s. Various reports were written. One particularly prominent report was called Voices for the Future by Professor George Smolich, who was a prominent South Australian working in this area. And that led to the first ever state languages policy for languages education in South Australia. Prior to that time, languages had been available only at secondary level in schools, and the new policy aimed to have languages in all primary schools by 1995 for all students in primary school, and that was largely achieved. Part of the policy also considered very seriously the need for languages education for students of other backgrounds, and that's why the School of Languages was established. So the school initially was established to meet the language learning needs of those particular students, but as time passed and it expanded, the role of the school expanded, our students come to us for all sorts of reasons. And the profile of each language that we teach is quite different. So the demographics in some of the languages we teach, for example, Bosnian, all the students are of Bosnian background. They might be third generation, but they are all of Bosnian background. In other languages that we teach, like French, the majority of the students will not be of French-speaking background or have any family connection with the French language and culture. They are learning the language purely out of interest. And so that is a reflection of how things change over time. And you know, now we are 35 years later. We are across all year levels from reception to year 12. We are no longer secondary only, and about 50% of our enrolments, over 2,000 students, about 50% of those are at primary level. And we have teaching centres all over the broader metropolitan area. We have about 90 staff, and one of the comments Anthony made earlier really resonated with me. You know, his comment being about language schools being excellent places to work. Absolutely true. In my staff is made up of such a linguistically and culturally diverse group of people, and we're all like-minded. We are all committed to languages education, and it's just such a great place to work because of that. We also, next slide please, I am based in Adelaide. Sorry, I'm just seeing some of the comments that are flicking up. We also have similar schools in some other states around Australia. So in Sydney, there are 2 schools. One of them caters to, offers languages by distance online. And the other one is based in Sydney for face-to-face classes. That particular school focuses on what they call community languages, and they can only enrol students who have a background in the language. So they have a few restrictions around who they can enrol. The school in Victoria is the one that is most similar to ours. They can enrol all students. They go from reception to year 12. They have many more languages than we do. They have over 40 languages. And in addition, they have an additional arm. They also do the distance learning. They have over 15,000 students. They are a very big school. Darwin has a school. Alice Springs, you know, we're all the same, but we're all quite different in terms of what we do. Next slide, please. I probably can just gloss over this because I don't need to convince the audience today of the benefits to students of learning languages. And this is taken from the National Statement for Languages Education back in 2005. So all ministers of education committed to this statement. Look, while my school and the other schools of languages all reflect government commitments, that is, and the schools are thriving, I have to say, though, that in mainstream schools, languages are struggling in many cases. Communities go to great lengths to support and strengthen languages, and we have community languages schools as well across Australia. They do receive a bit of government funding, so that is a good thing. And they do rely on to keep the language going. But, you know, in Australia, while languages are faring well in some places, we do have sort of a highly bifurcated system where in most institutions there is still a mono communities. You by enough.
Leah, I'm sorry, is it just on my side or is the sound becoming a little difficult? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, it's also very bad here.
Do I need sound?
Leah, could you say
Think I-
something? Sounds like this is on Leah's side, but let's wait and see what happens. Leah, it would be good to hear you if you're there. Let me stop sharing for a little while and pause the recording, sharing the slides. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Renata. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the languages that we are, and the next one, please. The languages that we are teaching. The ones that will appear in bold are being taught across the whole spectrum of year levels, reception through to year 12. And the other ones are taught only at secondary level. our offerings are all based on demand. So if there, I'm constantly on the lookout for where is there a demand to either expand what we currently have or introduce a new language. So for example, Thai was only introduced this year. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, all of our classes are after hours. They have to be, otherwise students can't attend because during the day they are at school. If anybody is interested in seeing more information about us, please look at our website. There's quite a bit of information on there. Yes, go to the website because obviously today there's only so much information that can be provided. Next slide, please. We'll show you a picture of our school building where this is where we work during the day, but when we teach, we're out all over the place. The network spreads far and wide. Next slide, please. For students and for staff, it is quite a unique setting. Because we do have highly motivated learners. Learners choose to come to us. In some cases, it's the parents choosing for them, but on the whole, they are highly motivated. And our community is so diverse and rich. We have one single lesson a week. And I always say to parents when we have parent information sessions, one single lesson a week goes against everything we know about the ingredients for successful language learning, because we know that what supports successful language learning is regularity and frequency. But given our context, we can't have 10 minutes or 15 minutes of a lesson every day because of the logistics. It just wouldn't work. Parents wouldn't be able to get their children to us. So we have the single weekly lesson, but that is supported by the online presence. Each of our classes has an online space, and through that space we encourage our teachers to be in ongoing contact with the students, and we encourage the students to spread their homework out over the week, not to do it in one block. So that they keep the contact with the language in between the weekly lessons. The next slide will outline some of the additional things that we do. Oh, yes, look, this is just some quick points that we provide about how we support successful language learning. We make, because of our context, we do have to ensure that communication with our school communities, with our parents and with the other schools. We have over 270 schools that send us their students. So keeping that communication going with them is really important. So they receive information from us constantly. They receive copies of students' reports. They receive our newsletter. I've noticed a comment, how long are the lessons? Generally, after the lessons are for secondary students, they are 3 hours long. For primary students, they are 1.5 hours long. But on Saturday mornings, the primary lessons go for 3 hours. And that might sound like a lot, but because it's morning, the students come to school, fresh, and obviously there's a break in the middle, a 15-minute break, but it works. It works. Next slide, please. In addition to our language lessons, which are our core business, we also do other things to enhance language learning for our students and for others beyond our school. So until COVID, we did have study tours. These are on hold now for obvious reasons, but we have taken students to Spain and to Italy, to Germany, to Korea, to New Caledonia because there were travel restrictions, to France, to Japan. So we can't wait to reinstate these, and the state government has scholarships for students. So we're looking forward to reactivating those. We do have a series of holiday activities that we do, and these are open to students who are not our students, and open to our students as well. The holiday intensives are designed specifically to focus on the development of oral skills. So the focus there is on really interesting and engaging oral activities to enhance students' confidence and proficiency in speaking the language. Languages Alive is aimed at primary school students, and that's really to spark an interest in students, to help them to understand the range of different languages and cultures that are alive and well, and to give them a taste of what is there and to motivate them to learn languages. And we take both of these programs out to country and regional areas as well, where we don't have a presence teaching, but by taking these holiday programs out there, we get to expose those students in particular to that linguistic and cultural diversity that they don't always get to be exposed to. And the last one is the vacation school that we run, that has a particular focus on exam preparation at the end of year 12, which is the final year of schooling, where we have public exams, a public oral exam and a public written exam, which essentially means students sit for an exam that is offered statewide, and it's marked independently. It's not the teacher that marks it, it's the examination board, and that counts for university entry. Next slide. Now, I'm aware there are comments, but I'm not actually seeing them all, so I may have to ask somebody to point out some of the key questions. Like like other schools, we have a school council that includes representatives of students, of parents, and of some of the key stakeholders in languages education, like the Modern Language Teachers Association. The community languages schools are also represented on our school council. There's also a ministerial committee for languages and cultures, which I am on, and is also on my school council, and that committee exists to provide advice to the minister. Next slide, please. I do want to talk a little bit about the broader state context, because we are not an island as a school, so we interact and intersect with all sorts of other things that are going on. At senior secondary level, the senior secondary certificates across Australia recognise languages and for university entry and for senior secondary completion. And here in South Australia, the senior secondary certificate has 36 different languages across 50 different courses. The reason why there's a difference in that number is because there are 3 different levels at which languages can be offered. There's beginners, which is for students who've never done the language before. There is continuers, which is for students who've done the language at least all through high school. And then there's background speakers, which is essentially for international students who've done most of their education in country in that language. And so when they come to Australia, there's an opportunity for them to continue their literacy development and literature studies in those languages at quite high levels. And not all languages are offered at all 3 of those levels. I do have the next few slides that actually illustrate provide a list of which languages are offered at each of those 3 levels. Some of these languages are offered through national collaboration because they are quite small, and without that national collaboration, it would not be possible. to offer such a diversity of languages. And then the very last point there is about languages that actually don't have a course. They can still be offered because we have what's called a language and culture course, through which you can essentially offer languages that don't have their own curriculum. So, for example, we have been offering Nepali through the language and culture course, and I've done a bit of work to lobby with the senior secondary board to have Nepali recognised as a language in its own right by having its own course. And next year, Nepali will be offered as its own continuous course for Year 11 students, leading to Year 12 level in the following year. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see the list of languages that are offered at beginners level. I think there's another slide. And then continuous level has quite a few. Many of these are offered through the national collaboration with other states. Next slide. More of the continuous courses, and the next slide has the background speakers courses. And the next slide, in addition to all of these languages, we also have, of course, Australian languages. And so this recognises the more than 250 different Australian Indigenous languages around the country. And so students can study any one of those through one of these different course types, whether they are learning the language as an additional language. So in my school, we're teaching Pitjantjatjara, which is a language that's taught, that's spoken in Central Australia, Northern South Australia. We have language, first language courses that recognise, that provide a pathway for students for whom a particular language is their first language. And then there is a revival course for students who wish to study a language that is no longer spoken right through. There's also English as an additional language, which is, I thought I would mention that because that recognises the language learning needs of students who have come to Australia as migrants, who are, for them, English is an additional language. So, and that's a subject that is also recognised for senior secondary completion and university entry. Now, I think that was the last slide. And so I can't see the comments or questions on my screen, but if someone can perhaps highlight some of the key ones for me, I'd love the opportunity to talk to them.
So it's Aga, our host,
Yes,
who is reading all the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Leah, for your presentation. The first question that we got here comes from Agnieszka, who works for post-primary languages in Ireland. And Agnieszka is asking, what is the student attrition rate?
Thank you. In our school, our retention rate is about 70 to 80%. So we keep most of the students from one year level to the next. There's a bigger attrition rate when they move from primary to high school. Often because the students, you know, they've changed schools. Once they start going to secondary school, the timetable might not suit them, or the travel to the teaching centre where the language is available might not be possible for them. In mainstream schools, the attrition rate is much higher, or the retention rate is much lower once languages are no longer compulsory. And this gets back to one of the points I made at the beginning of the session. Because languages are not really that valued in the broader community, and there are schooling structures that work against languages. Students have many, once languages are no longer compulsory, and in many schools, they are in many secondary schools, they are only compulsory in year 8. And so the minute they are optional and students have to choose between a language or a wealth of other options that's open to them, they drop languages. So in secondary schools, languages are not that healthy. Next question.
Thank you very much, Leah. We also have a question about the how long are the weekly lessons and whether the students can sit exams at the end of their education.
Yes, so at secondary level, the lessons are 3 hours long, and at primary level, the weekday lessons are 1.5 hours long, but on Saturday mornings, they are 3 hours long. The exams for senior secondary completion and university entrance, yes, the languages subjects all count for that. And not only do they count, but the universities here give bonus points to students who study a language. That's an initiative that was introduced quite a few years ago as an incentive for more students to study languages. Next
That's
question.
great. And also another question we have, it's about the level of teaching. Are native languages at the same level and are they equally important?
Very, very good question. They are for accreditation and for recognition, they are all equally important, absolutely equally important. In terms of the level, as I said earlier, there are 3 different levels for senior secondary accreditation. Beginners, and our senior secondary certificate goes over 2 years, year 11 and year 12. So the beginners level starts at the beginning of year 11 with no knowledge of the language is required. And the students is quite an intensive course, an accelerated course. But the level that students achieve by the end of year 12 obviously is not as high as the level that's required for students who've been doing the language all through secondary schooling. And then the level for background speakers is at quite a high level because that's assuming that the students have native speaker-like or, you know, approximately native speaker-like proficiency.
Thank you very much, Leah.
Yeah.
We also...
Go on.
Sorry, because I may have interrupted you. If you wanted to say something else to that question.
Yeah, look, I was just going to add, we don't use the Common European Framework here. So if people wanted to know, you know, how do those levels compare with the Common European Framework, there hasn't been an analysis done to match that up. But, you know, probably the continuous by the end of year 12 would be somewhere around the B1 mark, maybe.
Thank you very much. Leah, we also have a question whether you collaborate somehow with heritage language programs or community languages schools that are run by communities.
Yes, we do. The community languages of South Australia is represented on our school council, and in fact their office is in our building. So we do, we are connected at that level, but we are separate entities. So, you know, we help each other out as we can. So, for example, one of our teachers of Korean who works part-time with us is now working with community languages, providing professional development. So, you know, we collaborate at the level of, and they asked me if I had a teacher who was schooled in that area, I recommended that teacher. So we do, and sometimes when we can, we open up some of the professional development for those teachers, but that's not always possible because of numbers, and especially now with COVID, when you have restrictions on numbers of people that you can have in a room, it becomes a bit more difficult. But we do try to work together as much as we can. And we certainly will be happy to share resources with the community languages sector. Is there another question?
Thank you. I think we experienced some technical problems again, Leah, as I couldn't hear you at the end.
I did hear. It was a little interrupted, but still understandable. So
Okay.
let's go ahead with the questions. There are a few more.
Okay, we have one more question, Ranta, that is actually yours. And you're asking here, how do we talk about heritage language schools with the compulsory schools and with local and national governments?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. The question is, how do we talk about heritage language schools with the compulsory schools and with local and national governments?
Look, that's a very good question. And, you know, in Australia, there has been a lot of lobbying. There has been a lot of lobbying at state and national levels. The connection between community languages and mainstream schools across Australia is very much dependent on each individual school and the leadership within that school. So where the leadership is comprised of people who are committed to languages education and understand its importance, that collaboration can be quite successful. So some principals will welcome community language schools onto their site, will welcome that presence, and others, unfortunately, will not. Our minister, or for many years, so successive governments of each persuasion fund community language schools, and they also provide a little bit of funding to mainstream schools that are prepared to host community language schools on their premises. So that's a very good thing, and that helps. But unfortunately, there are some schools that do their best to try not to have community languages schools there, and it can be difficult for some of those schools to find a space for their teaching. So the short answer to that question is that collaboration will, on the ground, the communication depends very much on the leadership of each individual school. At the political, at the policy and political level, though, there is that commitment, there is the funding, and there is recognition of community languages, the education in some of the states. In New South Wales, for example, senior secondary accreditation of languages does not recognise language learning in community schools. It only recognises language learning in mainstream schools and in their schools of languages, the equivalent of our school, the government schools. So if students wish to, in New South Wales, if they wish to learn a language for their senior, can you still hear me? Has it dropped out again?
Yeah, yes, we do. We hear you very well.
Yes.
Good, yes. Yes, unfortunately, that's the situation in New South Wales, but not in South Australia or Victoria. Is there another question?
There is a question, if you could provide us a quick answer, maybe, as we are almost at the end of the conference. So the question here is, what time during the day the teaching of heritage languages take place? And also there was a question before whether you provide digital learning or online learning.
Thank you. We do not, our classes are not online. Our role is to provide face-to-face instruction. There is another school in South Australia called the Open Access College, which has the responsibility for online learning, and they do teach some languages, but not the number that we teach. During COVID, of course, we did go to online learning, but once the lockdown, each time there has been a lockdown, we have had a few short lockdowns. When they have stopped, when the lockdowns have ceased, we've returned to face-to-face learning. The first question about what time do the lessons start, that varies in each different teaching centre, and we have about 30 different teaching centres. But essentially, it's at primary level, most classes start somewhere between 3:30 and 4 o'clock. And at secondary level, most classes start at 5 o'clock. On Saturday mornings, they all start at 9 o'clock in the morning. Next question, or are we out? And look,
thank you very much.
If people would like to know the actual specifics about the times, our timetables are on our website.
Thank you very much, Leah, and thank you for your presentation and for all the answers you gave us. I think there could be actually more questions, but according to the plan, we're supposed to finish already for today in a few minutes. So I just sent you some links if you would like to stay in touch with us. There is a Facebook group that we created, there is a Facebook page that we created, and also a FOHLC Europe website. And if you could also see on the Heritage Language Education Network website, there's very interesting resources for heritage language programs for you to explore. So I guess that's the end for today, but we really hope to see you tomorrow. And I'm sending you a link to our program for tomorrow, so you can also check what we have planned for tomorrow. I'm just gonna tell you that it's gonna be really interesting, and hopefully everybody will have a chance to engage and into our networking session and to collaborate with each other, to share your experiences, to introduce yourselves and your work. So tomorrow we are starting 1 hour earlier. We're starting at 6 p.m. London time, and we are finishing at the same time, about 9 p.m. in the evening. So you can also see all the details in the link provided. Thank you very much. It was great to see you. It was great to have you here, and we hope that you can join us tomorrow as well.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody,
Bye.
for the attendance, and see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Trust.
Thank you.
And the question was, where was the apology?
We will get more opportunities to talk tomorrow. Today we listened, tomorrow we will talk.
Okay.
Renata, I'm afraid I'll miss tomorrow's session because I have to teach at the Heritage School.
Of course.
Are you going to record it? Are you going to record tomorrow's session?
Tomorrow will not be recorded. It's networking and it's
recorded.
workshopy, but I'll be so happy to connect with you and share with you.
Okay,
about it.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. You did
Thank
a
you
pretty
for
good
coming.
job. I learned a lot from today's 2 keynotes. That was great.
That's a great inspiration. I really look forward to listening again.
Yeah, because you know what? When we created the document, sustainability is a big issue, but I found I didn't quite understand what it means. But from today's keynote from Professor Thrope, I finally got the concrete idea and what it should be. So I felt it